Thanks for taking the time to download this BBC Radio 5 Live podcast. To search for other podcasts you might like, click bbc.co.uk/5live, where you'll also find our terms of use.
Sounds of Africa there to once again kick off our World Football phone-in. The number to call is 0500 909 693 if you'd like to join us. 0500 909 693. And this morning we're talking about the Women's World Cup, which kicks off later on in Canada. We're talking about the Champions League final in Berlin, and we're talking about the Copa America in South America. The Legendino, as ever, is in Rio. We've got 5 Live Zone Caroline Barker with us this morning. Caroline, good morning.
Morning, although I'm not entirely sure what time of day it is because there's a huge fireworks display. I don't know if you can hear it going over my shoulder out the back of the hotel at the moment, which is a little bit scary. But
where are you?
I'm in Moncton on the east coast, so we're 4 hours behind you at the moment. So it's just after 10 here, and boy, do they like to party. This firework display's been going on since last week, by the sounds of it.
And that's Moncton. Is it Vancouver or where in Canada?
No, we're in the east coast of Canada, in New Brunswick.
Sorry.
And you will be.
I do know, yeah, exactly. I do know my east from my west.
And we're off. We're in Moncton for 2 games following England, and then we're off to Montreal to follow them for the third group game. So I'm on an England bent, but I've been looking ahead to all things World Cup throughout the past few weeks on the World Service. So all over it, sunshine.
Yeah, we've got Caitlin Murray with us as well, who's in Oregon, aren't you, Caitlin, at the moment? But you're already packing your bags for Canada, I understand.
I should be further along with packing my bags, but yeah, I'm going to be heading to Winnipeg to follow the U.S. women tomorrow for you, and excited to be here.
And, ladies, just bear with me just for a moment, okay, because there is an elephant in the room. And, in the shape of Tim Vickery, there's always an elephant in the room. Tim, let me put it to you like this. We'll just clear the air here, and then we'll get back to the important issue of the Women's World Cup. It's happened again. It's happened again. Legendino, it's happened again.
What is this singing in aid of?
Oh, you don't like my singing?
No, I can stomach it. I prefer your wife's, frankly.
Okay.
But I can. I think we should all have a little bit of a song in our hearts.
Okay,
we'll happened again.
That's not me, by the way.
It's happened again. Legendino, it's happened again. It's happened again. It's happened again. Legendino, it's happened again.
Oh, you asked for my wife, and there she was, even on cue.
Well, if we can have Marilyn and JFK, then why not Carol Thompson and Obama?
This is
it's
true.
Perfect.
This is true. This is true. Obviously, Jack Wilshere's antics after Arsenal won the FA Cup final doesn't quite reach South America, does it?
Well, there's a few other things. You may have seen them going on in the world of football. I was just thinking before we came on the air tonight.
Yeah.
And usually we try and do all the football news that's fit to print. How on earth are we going to fit everything in this week? There's so much happening.
A week is a long time in FIFA. We're not even going to talk about that this morning. So we're talking about the Champions League final. We're talking about the Copa America. But most importantly, we're talking about the Women's World Cup. And put this in context for us, if you will, Caitlin. How big is the tournament this time around? Because certainly from a UK perspective, this is, I believe, the first time that the BBC is covering all the matches live, as it were, on television. Do you feel that there's something different about the tournament this time around?
Absolutely, and it's the same sort of feeling here in the United States. For the first time, every single match throughout the tournament is going to be on Fox Sports here, the big broadcaster. And And even at the U.S. has been playing friendlies before this game. In 2011, they had a send-off in New Jersey. They had 6,000 people there. This time around, it's sold out. They had 26,000 people there. So the feeling is definitely bigger, and it's helped by the fact that this tournament will literally be the biggest one because it's expanded from 16 teams to 24. So I think a lot more people are interested. I think expectations are higher, and I think it's going to be a really good tournament.
Caroline, why is it happening? Why is it this time around that people are taking notice of the Women's World Cup much more than ever before?
I think Caitlin's right. The media's certainly helped. They're talking of up to 1 billion TV viewers worldwide for this particular tournament. And yes, it is also because you've got more teams involved, so naturally you're going to have more people gravitating towards it. But I think finally women's football is sorting itself out. It's growing at grassroots level globally. We've just had on the BBC as well the first Women's Footballer of the Year award, which was won by Nigeria's Asisat Oshoala. And we're seeing players play around the world too, not just in their home countries, and that interest, that level of interest is just growing and growing and growing. And also you've got stars, you've always had stars, but you've got big global names. Caitlin will know in the US as well just how much these women's soccer players are dominating the media too, which is helping.
When you say that women's football needed to sort itself out, what specifically did it need to sort out?
Well, I think for many years, the best players would gravitate towards the US as well. The domestic leagues in the US then took a turn for the worse. They're coming back now. In England, if you look at the WSL, the Women's Super League as well, the number of global players that are in, they're expanding to 2 leagues for the WSL too, and you've got promotion up and down, and you've got more teams taking that professional bent as well. And then, as I say, globally in Africa, teams are coming through, and we've got 8 debutantes at this World Cup. And the likes of Spain getting their act together, Brazil, could they do well this tournament? And the big names that we've traditionally seen in the men's game starting to do well in the women's game too.
This question from Ben. Caitlin, do you want to take this first? And we'll throw it around amongst the panellists. With the Women's World Cup on the horizon and ladies' teams being added in the new FIFA 16 video game. I never knew that. How is the women's game perceived in your respective regions, and who's the best female player from the panelist regions? Caroline alluded to the big stars of the game there. Who are the big stars where you are in the USA, Caitlin?
Well, I think, Alex Morgan is a huge star. She scores a lot of goals. She also, she has the look that I think, a lot of advertisers really like.
What is that look? Describe it, please.
Well, I mean, she's an attractive player, so she's used in a lot of ad campaigns, and she is kind of, what we would call here the all-American appearance. So I think a lot of, young girls identify with her. And, as the listener alluded to, women are going to be included in the game, FIFA 16 for the first time. And I think here, the way soccer is perceived is, for the United States, it's probably the most popular women's sport. Here, soccer is a newer sport. It doesn't have the, sort of tradition we see in other countries around the world. And I think there's less of the need to break the idea that it's a men's sport. So people here have been really receptive to women's soccer. They're very supportive of it. And I think that's, why you're seeing such huge support for the U.S. women's national team. They've sold out all their last few friendly matches, the first time they've actually done that.
Yeah, it's ironic. In the United States, many people think of soccer, as you call it, as a girly sport, really, don't they?
I think there's a perception of that because it is the most popular sport for girls to play. So, I mean, any woman in the United States probably did play soccer when they were a kid. But, I mean, we have MLS, which is, it's attracted a lot of stars, kind of beginning with David Beckham, and now we have a lot of players coming in from overseas. So I think that, the idea that it's a women's sport isn't necessarily accurate, but I think there is, people are more accepting of the idea that women here are going to play soccer, and they are stars, and they are, serious athletes.
Yes, a very different perception of the way that football is perceived over here in Britain, Caroline. I wonder if you could tell us primarily who are the British or the English, British, if all the other countries are also taking part, the stars that we need to look out for?
Well, you say British because, of course, Team GB they got everyone behind them, the footballers did at least, at the Olympics. London 2012 was a kind of real pinnacle moment for women's football in the UK. But Alex Morgan was mentioned by Caitlin there. She's a real star who can garner over, I think it's over $1 million she gets with sponsorship that comes in as well. Nowhere near that amount for the players in the UK. England's Steph Houghton's also in that FIFA 16 game, and she's one of those that you really look to, and she too was part of Team GB. She's captain of England. She's one of the players to look out for. Eni Aluko, who's been to World Cups before, to these big tournaments before. Is this her time to really crack it and show what she can do? She plays for Chelsea, one of those professional players in the WSL, like Jordan Nobbs, Karen Carney, another big player. But what England have done, I mentioned Karen Carney, they've taken, Mark Sampson, the coach, has taken a few of the injured players just coming back from injury to this tournament, and his predecessor, Hope Powell, that's what she used to get stick for when she went to big tournaments, and she took players that weren't fully fit, and he's done the same. So it'd be interesting to see if it pays off for him.
From a South American perspective, Tim, Martha was the big name, wasn't she, in Brazil for many years? You've often told the story about how she was, to put it mildly, pushed out of the game as a youngster because her relatives didn't think that it was a game.
Her brothers, yeah, she suffered from her brothers. I mean, my girlfriend, who's only a year younger than me, she won't thank me for telling you that, but she was beaten up by her dad for playing the game. We're going back to the 70s there. During the military dictatorship, women's football in Brazil didn't exist. Marta has been voted the world's greatest player on a number of occasions. That the worrying thing is the absence of new Martas. Marta is 29, coming up 30 now. There's one in the Brazil squad, Formiga, who's been there ever since the Olympics in 1996. So there's a lack of renovation. That 1996 Olympics is significant. The Brazil's women went as real second-class citizens. The men's football team were first class. They were back of the plane. The women were back of the plane. But the pennants that the captains are given to exchange before the game, they only issued enough pennants for their 3 group games. They qualified for their group. They didn't have any more pennants. I did an interview on this. I did it for the BBC World Service a few years back. The goalkeeper spoke a little bit of English, and she went to the captain and tried to teach her enough English to apologise to the opposing captain. Sorry, we haven't got any more pennants to swap with you. But that was a moment when you could see the hint of a breakthrough. And then soon after that, Marta came through, and for a while, Brazil were really knocking on the door of winning the World Cup or winning the Olympics. It never quite happened. And in recent years, I think they've gone back. And I was at Wembley, took my girlfriend, for the game against GB women, Brazil women, GB women, in the London Olympics. And the physical advantage that Brazil had at one stage had now gone because they haven't developed. They've stood exactly still. It's only now, right this year, that the Brazilian FA, the CBF, have finally decided to get organised with this. And at the moment, everything's in flux with the Brazilian CBF, like the other South American FAs, because of the corruption scandal. But they have appointed a fella, Marco Aurelio Cunha, with a lot of experience in football and in politics, to be the supremo, to get the base sorted out, really to start from zero. It's an admission that they haven't done anything, really. They just relied on a spontaneous generation coming through because they have such a big population, and football is so important. And yes, Marta is fantastic, the most significant thing that's happened, because she's legitimised the activity. But without a structure in place, there's nowhere for the young girls to go. So you don't have a base, you don't have a structure, you don't have a renovation of the team. So they're planning to start right from zero, and he's making a lot of the right noises, Marco Aurelio Cunha. He's saying, right, I will have failed if at the end of my term doing this job I don't pass on to a woman. It should be a woman in that position. They've got a man coach with a long history in First Division Brazilian football. Should be a woman. In future, that they'll want to qualify women's coaches as well. But really, so far, they've frittered away the kind of spontaneous potential they had. Now they want to get organised. The other two South American teams, Colombia and Ecuador. And Ecuador, they qualified through a playoff. I think anything they get from this is a bonus. Colombia, I think it's their second appearance in the Women's World Cup. And I think feminine football, women's football is stronger in Colombia because of the cultural proximity to the United States. I think that there's a kind of spillover effect. The success of the women's game in the States has legitimised it in Colombia. And maybe in the long term, Colombia can do some interesting things as well.
It's interesting, though. You echo what Caroline says about if you don't get your house in order, the women's football can't thrive in that sense. But do you think that Brazil is paying the price culturally or for not taking it seriously culturally because of the way women's football was perceived? Is that what is the nub of why it's not produced anymore, Marthas?
It's a possibility. It's a point that Marco Aurelio Cunha is making. Look at the teams who are best at this. Usually, they're not only the most advanced economically, they're the most advanced culturally as well. The States, Germany, Sweden, Japan, so on. That there is a possibility there, but I think more than anything, it's been the difficulty of getting a structure up and running, and one or two teams invested in it. Santos, the club of Pelé, invested in women's football and got to put together a team with most of the stars. They had two problems. Number one, who do they have to play against? You need a structure. You need a league. It's no good having a team. You've got to have an opponent. The other problem was, when they needed to find some money to keep Neymar before he went to Barcelona, they kept him for a couple of years. They had to cut corners, and one of the corners they cut was they just scrapped their women's team. An interesting thing that's happening, there's the Brazilian clubs, they owe a fortune to the government in unpaid taxes and so on. There's a bill going through Brazil's parliament at the moment which would offer those clubs to pay back the unpaid taxes on very, very favourable terms. In return for that, the clubs would have to carry out a number of measures. One of those measures would be to invest in women's football. Now, that's proving quite controversial. People are saying, how can you oblige clubs to do it? But the clubs aren't obliged to be able to pay their tax money back on favourable terms. It seems to me that if the government's doing them a favour, the government has the authority then to ask for something in return. So we're beginning to see 2 or 3 measures, beginning to see things happening. But really, I think so far it's been the case of 18, 19 years frittered away.
Caroline, one tweet here suggests that the Women's World Cup is in Canada because it was the only country willing to host it. Is that true?
No. There have been lots of countries wanting to put themselves forward to host it. There's been controversy over Canada, no doubt, they're hosting it, not least with regard to the artificial pitches. It's probably a phrase that you'll hear many, many times uttered around this Women's World Cup. The first World Cup, men's or women's, first tournament to be played on artificial pitches. I think that Canada are embracing it. They're seeing the financial gains. Where I am in Moncton, there's a whole series of events being held next week where they'll be discussing about how they can best take money from tournaments like this and make the most of tournaments like this. They're adapting stadia. The stadia in Moncton is a university stadium that's got temporary seating put up for the occasion. Now 20,000-seater stadium moved from what was just a university facility, and they are adapting it. But we are seeing the game change globally, and we do need to see more input financially, as Tim was saying, and perhaps it's kind of the forceful way that they're doing it in Brazil, trying to force through change. Even in England, things have changed from the extent when Hope Powell, the last coach of England, when she was playing, the players used to sleep on gym floors before internationals. They washed their own kit. That was just 2 decades ago. And now we see a huge medical entourage turn up with the England team when they walked through the airport earlier today. They're taking things seriously, and they're building as well, and these blocks are going in. And of course, we're not really talking about things that have happened at FIFA this week, but they have been stressing in all the press conferences that the way forward for FIFA, the way for FIFA to progress as an organisation, is to have a strong belly, be that belly an undercurrent of grassroots football, women's football. They need to improve and show that they're serious about women's football if they're going to create structure at the highest level.
Well, seeing you brought it up, we can talk about it. Why not? Is that part of Sepp Blatter's legacy, then, that women's football has reached a certain height under his term in office, however controversial that might be?
The godfather of women's football, I believe he called himself in a recent BBC interview. There are certain things that Sepp Blatter has said about women's football that I wouldn't say improved the game, that created negativity towards the game. There are, though,
like
and you'll know this, he talks about whether they should have skin-tight shorts and skin-tight shirts. He commented when two female members were put on the FIFA Exco. He talked about one of them, Maya Dodd from Australia, how beautiful she was, rather than commenting necessarily on her skills as someone to be on Exco. There are elements that he, of course, has got wrong, but he has, whether it's under his it was under his watch, there has been an improvement in women's football. But I think a lot of that has had to do with women's football pulling itself up by its bootstraps.
Caitlin, you laughed when Caroline reminded us that Sepp Blatter saw himself as the godfather of women's football. Why?
I think that Sepp Blatter's level of delusion is pretty amusing. I mean, yeah, the women's game has grown a lot under his leadership, but I have to wonder how much of that is motivated by how much it could help FIFA, make money. Every FIFA-sanctioned event, all the players who are registered under FIFA. I mean, I don't know that it is an entirely altruistic endeavor. And, I mean, one of the things we've talked about is that the World Cup this time around has expanded to 24 teams. One of the reasons that FIFA has given is they think that expanding the tournament will, help help countries take their women's program seriously. And, I kind of wonder if they really want women's teams taken seriously. Why don't they, increase the prize money? Japan got $1 million when they won the World Cup in 2011. Germany, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think it was like $35 million. So, I mean, yes, the women's game has grown under FIFA, but I don't think it's necessarily born out of a desire to, see women treated as equal athletes. But, I'm not inside Sepp Blatter's brain. Maybe he really is passionate about that issue. I don't know.
And apart from the prize money and what Caroline said earlier about organising your game properly from country to country, what is the secret of the US success with women's football? The United States is one of those countries, like the Scandinavian countries, always used to be big on women's football, and it wasn't a big deal there to see success for their countries in women's football. I don't know if it's still the same in terms of those countries, but what is the secret, do you think, of success in the American game? There was a time when America was one of those countries that UK professional women would look to go to further their game, not least because you had all these scholarships at colleges and so on. Is that the way forward or what?
Yeah, I think you touched exactly on that. So in the United States, I don't know about other countries, but in the United States, we have a law that says if schools, high schools, universities, if they are going to be providing resources to men's sports teams, they need to also provide the same resources to women's sports teams. So any young girl has the opportunity to play on a team, train, play in competitive matches, and be developed as an athlete. And, I think that's the number one thing in the United States, even in men's soccer. Most of our players tend to be developed at the collegiate level. They play in school. They're not, leaving their family to go join a club academy. It's a very different system. So that law that requires those resources in school is the main reason why, young women are able to develop as athletes. And then I think the second reason, specifically in soccer, was something I kind of touched on earlier, is there's not that long-standing football culture of this is a men's game. So I think there are less barriers that women have to break down in order to be accepted as legitimate athletes.
Dotun, on that point, the FA in the UK are raising the age limit at which boys and girls can play football in the same teams from 16 to 18 from next season. So they're trying to say that the mixed football should be the way forward for improving the women's game in the UK. I think I'm right in saying that the likes of Denmark, there's no age limit for mixed teams. I think Netherlands and Switzerland, it might be sort of 18, 19 that they split it as well. So it'd be interesting to see what effect that has on it too. And in reference to the text we had about Canada being the only ones, I'm just flicking through the Canadian local paper here, and they're actually the guy behind bringing the World Cup to Canada, talking in the local paper, saying that, yeah, we were the only ones that wanted to stand up and do it. He's been asked the question about FIFA this week, and obviously that corruption and whether that has played any part in the future of the women's game. And he said, we were the only ones that wanted it. So then it might be the case, but that might be where your texter was coming from.
Is the whole country behind it, though? From what you see, is it the equivalent of London 2012 for us?
They cannot have been any more welcoming than when we walked in. And that goes from, we flew into Toronto, which is not a host city because they've got the Pan Am Games coming up. So they weren't able to host it. We flew in there and they were all talking about the World Cup. Then we flew over to Moncton and there were vuvuzelas at the gates when we walked through them, and drums and the chants. And they're really trying to make an effort. They've got Shumi, who's this great big white owl, the mascot, who's wandering around all the cities, and they're trying to put fan parks on. It's not going to be as big as it would be if it was the Men's World Cup. But we hopefully will see, let's talk about 1.5 million going through the turnstiles, 1 billion possibly watching it around the world. Those facts and those people wanting to consume women's football can't be ignored, surely.
Indeed. Five Live's Caroline Barker's with us in Moncton in Canada. We've got the legend Dina Ezeva in Rio, and Caitlin Murray, who's a women's football journalist, is with us in Oregon, getting ready to go to the Women's World Cup in Canada. So we're talking Women's World Cup in Canada. We're also going to be talking after the news and sport about the Champions League final this weekend as well. Seth Bennett, can you believe it? Five Live's very own. He's gone to Barcelona. I think he's got the wrong city. 0500 909 693. If you'd like to join us, pick up the phone and give us a call. The Women's World Cup kicks off today on the BBC. Ahead of that, here on Up All Night's World Football Phone-In, we're talking as much as we can about the Women's World Cup. If you'd like to join us, give us a call. 0500 909 693. Five Live's Caroline Barker is in Moncton in Canada ahead of the World Cup. Which is the main game that you're going to see there, Caroline?
Well, I'll be waiting for England-France, which is on Tuesday. And boy, oh boy, did the French get a great reception when they arrived. Of course, Moncton, everywhere you go, all the signs are in French. Everyone speaks French. And Allez les Bleus was ringing in my ears. And so I started up an England chant on my own.
Yeah, that's not fair. It's going to be a home game for them. That's not fair.
Yeah, but to try and get a flavour of that, Mark Sampson, the England coach, arranged a friendly with Canada. So to try and get the home crowd behind you didn't go well for England. They lost that 1-0. But being in front of that kind of big crowd when they're all roaring at you, it's a 20,000 seater stadium. So I don't know how many will get in there. So they said at the moment they've got about 70% sold. So hopefully a few more walking up on the day as well, and a few more tickets sold, and they'll be rocking for both sides.
Caitlin Murray's with us as well. She's a football journalist in Oregon. She's going to Canada. Where in Canada will you be going, Caitlin, and what are you going to be seeing there?
I will be in Winnipeg. That's a sentence I never thought I would say. And I'm going to be there following the USA, and the big game to look out for is USA versus Sweden. That is going to be a clash of the Titans. And that game will probably decide which of those two teams wins that group, and whoever doesn't win that group and comes in second, probably awaiting them is Brazil. So it's going to be a very important match and very exciting.
Talking of Brazil, Tim Vickery as ever is in Rio for us.
I'm not. I'm in Santiago for in Chile for
this
the Copa
is true.
America.
I've just seen that. I don't even read what I've got here in front of me in my eyes. I'm so used to you being in Rio.
I don't even read. Full stop.
Thank you. Boom, boom. Now, where is Santiago? Is it Chile?
That's the capital of Chile.
Of course it is.
I got here by a very strange route because it was a miles flight. This all comes out of my own pocket, fight fans.
You keep saying
FIFA
that,
slush
Tim.
fund for the likes of me.
We don't even feel
so
sorry
I
for
went
you.
yesterday. I went Rio to Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia, and then Bogota to Santiago. Now, if you look at that on a map, you will see how crazy that is. But I've arrived. I'm all in one piece. I went out for a little stroll this morning and I thought, well, that's quite brisk winter air and clean, clear air here in Santiago. And then I bought a paper and the front page, it's a pre-emergency because of the quality of the air today. Santiago has a problem with pollution. It's kind of in a valley surrounded by mountains, so that smog tends to sit there. And they're even saying the authorities have declared this pre-emergency and they've stopped cars from using a number of streets. And they've been saying to the population, don't do any exercises at the moment. It's a pity. Well, they can't really say that to the Copa America players, can they, when the competition kicks off on Thursday?
And who's playing?
Well, it's the 10 South American sides, plus 2 guests from the region just above us, the CONCACAF region. And this time we have Mexico. It's always Mexico plus one other. It's been the United States, it's been Costa Rica, it's been Honduras, it's even been Japan, bizarrely enough. This time, for the first time, making their Copa America debut, it's Jamaica. And they're the first visiting side to arrive. Chile are obviously here already, they're the hosts. Jamaica have also arrived.
There's one other tournament to talk about this weekend, the Champions League final. It's in Berlin. So why is Seth Bennett in Barcelona? I know it starts with a B, Seth.
Well, you know me, Dawson. I'm just looking for the party, and my bet was the biggest party was going to be in Barcelona, not in Berlin, or not in anywhere else, including Turin.
Caroline, it sounds like you know Seth as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, no, I don't mean that. Seth gets all the good gigs. He's always off doing some ice hockey somewhere exotic. And we were having a debate in the bar earlier. I hasten to add I was drinking an orange juice about ice hockey, particularly in Canada. And whether ice hockey, Seth, I know this is completely off topic, Dot, and I apologise.
That's okay.
Whether ice hockey should only be played by nations where you can strictly go outside and play it.
Well, it is at the top level. Everybody below that struggles. But, yeah, at the top level, if you can go outside and skate in your back garden, you've got a chance. Everybody else, they're catching up. There's no chance of being able to be a top nation if you can't go out and play in your backyard.
So we're talking women's football, we're talking Copa America, we're talking Champions League as well. Michael in Highbury, good morning.
Good morning, Dawson.
0500 909 693 if you'd like to join us, pick up the phone, give us a call. So you want to talk about women's football, Michael? Go ahead.
Yeah. I have a theory that very much women's football reflects the success of men's football. Obviously, as a gooner, that's not the case. I.e., the men's team is getting successful where the Arsenal ladies are in a period of transition. But as has been mentioned already, Chelsea are the first ladies' professional team, and the men's team has obviously won the title this year. If my theory is correct, is it quite possible that the German ladies will emulate the men's football team and win the Women's World Cup?
Caitlin Murray, do you buy that theory?
I don't buy that theory because, no offense to the U.S. men, but they're not exactly winning World Cups. And we see that on the club level too. But I do think he's right that Germany is, they're a top contender. They are the #1 ranked team in the world. So there's something in the water in Germany or something, because, the German women could very easily win this World Cup. I think they are the favorite for a lot of people right now.
And Caroline, before we dismiss Michael's theory, Chelsea women are successful because Chelsea's decided that they want a successful women's team.
But they've also got a decent coach in Emma Hayes. Chelsea have worked hard. She's brought the right players in, got the right blend in. We're at the halfway point in WSL season, of course. They always have the mid-season break, whether it's the World Cup or not. You've got Chelsea up there. Arsenal are up there, though. They're second in the table at the moment. And then Notts County ladies in third. So does that tally up? Perhaps not.
Well, Charlton's ladies used to be really good. Let's leave that to one side, please, I beg you. But do you see something, seriously, Caroline? I mean, Michael is saying something, and it might just be a theory that is not tangible at the moment, but is there something in it, nevertheless, that when the male equivalent of a team does well, that there is attention on the female equivalent? Is there anything in there?
Where's Manchester United's ladies
That's
team,
a good question.
women's team?
That's a good question.
It's all dependent on the money that goes through, how well they do. Manchester City women, they changed their name from ladies. Manchester City women have had investment structurally. They play in the new Academy Stadium right next to the Etihad, which is a beautiful, beautiful stadium. They're not doing so well in the league at the moment. It's about how much investment goes into the team, how stable they are. The WSL, the Women's Super League in the UK, have tried to do something about that to make sure that clubs are sustainable. But we've mentioned Brazil. Tim was mentioning Brazil and how poorly they've done. Spain really only coming through now for the women's teams. I think Germany could do well. They're number one ranked team in the world. I think even you'll get to see them, Caitlin, because they're in Winnipeg, I think, for their last group game. So if you stick around, you could see them, or you'll probably be off to Vancouver.
Yeah, I'll be in Vancouver
USA.
by then, unfortunately. Yeah.
You'll miss out on them.
But on that international...
I wouldn't say that Brazil have done poorly. I think they've organised poorly. I think the actual players are heroes. I think they've overcome those organisational limitations. And there was a period when they came so close to winning World Cups and Olympics. They've just dropped off now as a result of not winning. And now they see themselves on their day. They reckon they can beat anyone, and they would put themselves in the top 5 of the world.
But they're below England in the rankings, aren't they?
Well, indeed.
Even below England.
Which it illustrates how much they've slipped back. The whole cultural thing is interesting, though, because I thought really interesting Caitlin's point that in the game in the States has grown in the absence of a male football culture. It didn't have to compete with that, so maybe it could create its own identity. Where in the more traditional football countries, I think there is clearly a trickle-down effect in terms of style and in terms of importance. And you can watch Brazil women, and you are clearly watching Brazil. With the emphasis on individual ability, with also, unfortunately, a lot of diving going on. And you can see that that's part of a football culture which they share with the men. Can I just hijack Dotton's role briefly and ask Caitlin, is there a specific US women's identity of play that only pertains to the women? Or if it pertains to the men as well, the men have come second. Is there something about US women's football that we can say, that is you, that's your style, that's your identity?
I mean, that's a good question. I think that, the U.S. men, the national team, for instance, is coached by Jurgen Klinsmann. So he brings, that German style. He brings a specific vision to that team. I think for the U.S. women, you tend to see, I think even still, a lot of direct soccer, just, route one, just get the ball in the box and do something with it. And I think that's a product of, for a long time, just being fit, being able to run for 90 minutes, being fast, being strong. Those were really the skills that helped women's teams do well when the game was still pretty young. We're seeing the women's game evolve a lot, so I do think that style is becoming less effective, but I do think we still see a lot of it. And, I think specifically with the American women, I think we will see that against some of the weaker opponents that they play.
Michael, thanks a lot for the call, by the way. 0500 909 693. If you'd like to join in the conversation. So we're talking women's football, Copa America, and the Champions League finals. Seth Bennett in Barcelona. I suppose people there expect that they're going to win again, don't they?
Yeah, every single person I've spoken to in the last 24 hours has told me they're going to win by 3 goals at least. It's either going to be 3-0 or 3-1. That's the viewpoint here. I had a little wander around the area where the big party will take place. They reckon about 30 or 40,000 people will be on the streets if they are going to go on and win this, as is expected in this part of the world. And already you can just sense how crazy that area will be. And they know that they've got something very special right now. And they know in the trident, the three amigos, whatever you want to call them, in Neymar, Suarez, and of course Lionel Messi, that they have this trio of players that can win them any game from anywhere. And of course, with the trident, they're looking to win 3 trophies as well. And I think it's going to be, this is a team that are incredibly exciting. And with a first-year coach as well, first year in charge for Luis Enrique, and this is, again, is this the start of the next era? And that's the question I've been asking everybody, how will this team compare to Pep Guardiola's team in 3 or 4 years' time? What do they think? And they all just said they can't compare. They will never compare to that team. Of course, it's the end of an era as well, Dawson, with Xavi playing his final game before he heads off to go and make a boatload of money elsewhere. And again, that's going to be seen as something that is really big for this region, because he's somebody that has done an awful lot for Catalonia. And that's amazing for the people here. They see him as being a bit of a hero both on and off the field of play.
Yeah, so questions on the Champions League final, please. Some of you Juventus fans might want to disagree with that 3-0 or 3-1 scoreline. 0500.
It wasn't my prediction.
Yeah, exactly. 0500 909 693. We've got Cleo in Aldershot with us. Good morning, Cleo.
Good morning, Dalton. And good morning, panel. Good morning, Tim. Well, what can I say about last Saturday?
Oh, it's happened again, Tim. It's happened again.
I'm afraid. But the BBC coverage was excellent, just like it was in the old days, back in the 70s. The whole day devoted to the FA Cup. And they even had the cheesy top of the pots with those good old Chelsea songs. Chelsea are... football is a game.
Yeah.
Chaz and Dave doing... We're on our way to Wembley.
That's wrong team, Chaz and Dave.
Oh.
But yeah, there is that tradition, isn't it? There used to be, anyway.
Yes.
FA Cup final day started at 8 o'clock in the morning when the kids woke up.
They followed the team.
Exactly.
It was, and they did, sadly, a couple from Birmingham, they chose that as their wedding day, and they were Villa fans. The bridesmaids were all claret, the groom and his groomsmen and the father were...
Cleo, I've just given away your age. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean the 70s. I meant the 90s.
Yes. I do remember that. Anyway, for Tim, England are in quite a hard group. They've got France and Colombia. And on the subject of teams beginning with C, it's the Copa America next week. And our boy Sanchez, who was the PFA Fans Player of the Season, his team are hosting it. But also Colombia men's, Cuadrado is sadly might be leaving Chelsea, and their other scorer is Baka. I know Tim had a joke on Twitter about Baka can, and he certainly could last week against the Ukrainian team and scored 2 goals. What are Chile's chances, bearing in mind that Tim said they were going to train outside of Spain, but with the late FA Cup and the very late Champions League final, I don't think it's ever been in June. How's that going to affect them? But really, England's chances against Colombia.
Chile abandoned the idea of training in Spain, and they've been training in Chile, but in a former monastery, so it's very secluded, and they saw it firsthand. How the pressures of being hosts affected Brazil last year in the World Cup. They very nearly eliminated Brazil. So Chile are worried about that pressure, because Chile have never won the Copa America. 99 years of the competition, they've never won it. And this, by popular consensus, is their best team ever. real pressure on them to win it. They just played tonight their last warm-up friendly. They beat El Salvador 1-0, but they've got a real problem scoring goals at the moment. The goals just seem to have dried up. They don't score the goals that they create. They have the ball so much, they create so many chances, and they're not scoring goals, and they do always give you a chance on the counter-attack. I'm really interested to see their first game on Thursday. It's the opening game of the tournament against Ecuador, because Ecuador are quick, can really punish you on the counter. I think it could be a really classic opening game. And they cope with this burden of being hosts. And the three favourites are obviously Chile, Brazil and Argentina. I probably have Brazil as narrow favourites. I just think they might have a better balance between attack and defence than Argentina, who have so much attacking talent. Defensively, not quite so much. Colombia, dark horses. I'm very optimistic about this tournament. I'm worried that we're going to lose still more injured players in the run-up, because there hasn't been much time to prepare. But in comparison with the tournament 4 years ago, which was a very defensive tournament, the last Copa America, I think that the balance of these teams this time around is much more attacking, and I think that there should be some terrific football. In terms of England being drawn in Colombia's group in the Women's World Cup, I would be surprised, I think, if Colombia can compete too much. It's only their second trip to a World Cup. I think it's and should be further down the line. So I'd expect England to win, but there are people here who can give you a far more qualified opinion on that game than I can.
Indeed. Caroline Barker, Mick in Luton is suggesting that the difference between... He's been watching women's international football, and he's saying that the difference he feels, anyway, between the favourites for the Women's World Cup and England is physical power rather than technique. And I don't know which end he means with that. Would you agree?
There's a rumour been doing the rounds that England, in preparation for their match against France, were playing one of the Burton Albion younger teams, either the under-20s or the under-18s, to try and match up physically. And that's something that England have done over the years. They play a few of the men's teams to try and physically improve their presence. And the game has got increasingly physical. I think, though, that Colombia, with their attacking style and flair as well, I think they're ranked 28th in the world. So that's the last game for England. They'll win that one. I would think England will win that one, and I imagine England will beat Mexico too. But it'll be an interesting test of their flair for that. But yes, it is one of the areas that England have looked at and tried to address, and seen that there's obviously an issue there.
And Caitlin Murray, do you think that the World Cup will be won by skill or by physical dominance?
I think that the game has evolved in a way where, we saw Japan win in 2011, and I don't think anyone picked Japan as a possible winner. If you want to talk about power and strength, I mean, the Japan team, that's not what they exude. They're more of a possession-oriented team, passing in tight spaces. And I think we're kind of seeing that evolution for women's soccer, where it is more about technical skill. It's less about power. That doesn't mean we're not going to see a lot of physical teams. The U.S., I think, is a very physical team. I think Canada can be pretty physical. We're still going to see that type of play, but I think this is the watershed moment. Like, is women's football gonna move beyond that? So I think that'll be interesting to see. This is going to be a really good World Cup for that.
There's a question for all of you. We'll take this after the news and sport from Ben, who says, greetings from Vancouver, which I know is on the West Coast, not the East Coast. A host of the final game of the Women's World Cup final. I'm taking my family to the final game. Please, could I have the panelist predictions as to whom will be the star of that game? Also, who will win the Golden Boot? World Football Phone in this morning. We're covering the lead up to the opening kick of the Women's World Cup, which is later on today in Canada. We're also talking Copa America, which is in Chile. and the Champions League final, which is in Berlin, although Seth Bennett somehow found his way to Barcelona for the Champions League final. We'll talk about that later on. With us, Caitlin Murray, who's a women's football journalist. She lives in Oregon, but she's making her way up to Winnipeg for the Women's World Cup. We've got the Legendino Tim Vickery. He's in Santiago, which is in Chile, for the Copa America. And we've got Five Live's very own, should I say women's football expert? Does that work for you, Caroline?
No, there's nothing expert
so.
about me.
But you've been flying the flag on this station, certainly for women's football, for many a year now. Caroline Barker, who is in Moncton in Canada. So this question from Ben that I asked, I want to throw it to you first of all, because I know we're going to lose you. Ben says he's from Vancouver, host of the final game of the Women's World Cup final. He's going to take his whole family to see the final game. So 2 questions. Who do you think is going to be the star of that game, and who will win the Golden Boot for the tournament overall?
I think it's going to be the Hollywood story. Abby Wambach's going to lift that trophy for the USA, and I'm only saying that because Caitlin's on, and I think she will finally get her hands on it, and I think she'll also get the Golden Boot as well. I think she came second in 2011 to Sawa from Japan, but I think she'll be the one with the old golden ball at the end of it.
Caroline, really appreciate you staying with us for so long. Hopefully you'll join us again during the course of the Women's World Cup as well. If you've got time, really appreciate it. Thank you for tonight.
Pleasure.
Caroline Barker there. So Caitlin Murray, is Caroline right? We know the USA loves its Hollywood, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a definite possibility we could see the U.S. there. I think, I'm wondering how much Abby Wambach, what her role will be. This is her last World Cup. It sounds like Alex Morgan might be injured, so this might be the opportunity for Abby to continue to start and, score a lot of goals, which she does well. I think for me, I want things to be a little unexpected, so I'm going to say that Sweden is going to win, and I'm going to say Lotta Schalen from Sweden is going to win the Golden Boot. Clinical finisher, really good movement off the ball. She's just been scoring a lot of goals in France, and, I'm just kind of taking a wild guess. I mean, who knows?
As we say in Stockholm, come again, Sverige, come again. And anyway, Caitlin, you're headed to Winnipeg. Somebody you might bump into there joins us now, Sarah Walsh, the former Australian number 9. Sarah, good morning.
Hello, excellent. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure, honestly. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got Caitlin with us, who's a journalist, heading your way very shortly. Caitlin Murray. We've got Tim Vickery with us as well. Lots of questions, but that question from Ben, Sarah, if you were listening to it, she wants to know who's going to be the star of the final.
Well, look, there's really only one answer I can give you. It's Lisa Devanna from Australia. Come on.
Of course. And he's going to get the Golden Boot.
Lisa Devanna, or I might take young Sammy Kerr from our forward line. But look, I actually like Maritsan from Germany, if I'm being really honest. I think she's going to be a star to watch this tournament. It's funny that you're talking about the Americans. We're actually sharing a hotel with them, so we've seen plenty of them over the last couple of days.
And I take it that Lisa Devanna is the star of the Australian team?
She is, yes, she is.
What can you tell us about
I believe
her?
she has. This will actually be her 100th cap against the US, and I believe she has something like 38 goals for Australia, and she's plied her trade in the US playing over there. So everybody's well aware of her game. She's probably our most, potent striker.
Why do the Australian women's team do arguably better than the Socceroos?
I guess law of numbers. I believe there's only, I probably shouldn't put it like that, but there's only 230 female national teams that play in the women's game, and something like 300-400 in the men's, I believe. But look, it's I think there's increased investment in our Socceroos, so I think that we bat above our weight quite well. So I couldn't really answer it, but I think they're starting to climb their way up there.
What are the challenges from a club team for women's football to the international game? What kind of challenges did you face? I say you're a number 9 and if you don't mind me saying so, a petite one at that.
Yeah, I'm very small actually. I think I actually had plenty of injuries throughout my career. I think they were probably the most difficult thing that I had to manage throughout my career, staying on the park, and I think probably finding really good medical support, and some of the clubs that I played in some of the countries didn't really have that, and I guess that's probably one of the differences when you play for your country. I think they probably look at you more long term and look at what will benefit you more so long term. And when you're at a club, they need you on the park there and then. There's really only 24 rounds, 24 matches, so I think they're probably some of the key differences for me.
I'm sure my colleagues have got questions for you as well, Sarah. Caitlin Murray, do you want to go first?
A question for Sarah?
Yeah.
Well, who are the new players? I'm familiar with Lisa Devanna. She's played in the NWSL here in the United States. Who are some of the players that maybe that aren't on our radars that maybe we should be looking for?
I'm not sure if you've heard of Katrina Gorry. She played at Kansas with Lauren Holiday. She's going to be one to watch. She's really found some form, and she's a pocket rocket. I believe she's about 4'9", and she plays in the midfield and probably hits the ball harder than anyone else on the park. I guess harder than our centre backs, but her ability to be able to beat players in the centre of the park and her game awareness, her touch on the ball, she'll be one to watch that I'm not sure you're well aware of. We've got Caitlin Ford and Sam Kerr, which I think you might know from the US League.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then outside of that, Steph Catley, she plays at Portland Thorns. She'll definitely be one to watch. And Elise Kellen-Knight, who in 2011 made the FIFA 11 squad at the end of the tournament. So there's a few players to watch, but I'd definitely keep an eye out for Katrina Gorry.
And Tim?
Great.
Where's our number? Our number. Yep, sorry.
Perhaps a similar question to the one I asked Caitlin earlier on. I mean, it was about 10 years ago now. I was at a World Under-17 Cup, and I ran into an Australian coach, a men's coach. And he said, look, the big problem that we've got now in Australian football is we have to sort out who we are. We have to sort out what we want to do. What is our model of play? What is our footballing identity? Who are we on the field? Is that a problem which also applies to the women's team? And if not, what is your footballing identity? Where do you place yourself in terms of style of play?
Well, it's actually probably an identity that we want to build on, and it's something that I guess it's not really football related, but it's almost this never say die attitude. And I think the US would definitely agree when they play us. We're never out of it. It's you have to play that way for the 90 minutes, and I think we want to evolve from that. It's funny you say that. So that's probably the tag that we have, and that's something we want to keep as our core. But add to that. So I would say that's probably prominent within any Australian team that you actually play against, no matter what sport.
And Seth Bennett, is this the way to Barcelona?
You know the worst bit, Dotton? I ended up flying through Germany on the way here. I ended up in Frankfurt. But anyway, my question's this, right? For you to be really strong, if you are anything but the USA or Canada, where they have the collegiate system, how do you recruit the best athletes and how do you retain them through those tricky years, sort of 16 to 20?
So is that for me, that question?
Yeah, that's for you, Sarah.
Yeah.
So in terms, to summarise it, was it to how do we actually keep our better athletes?
Yeah, and are you able to recruit the best? Are you able to recruit the best athletes between the ages of 16 and 20 to play football?
It's actually a really good question. I think, and I'm not sure if you have this issue in the US, but we have a lot of codes of football in Australia and a lot of competing sports. One of our top female sports is netball. I'm not even sure if you know what that sport is.
Of course I do. I've got a 14-year-old daughter.
I was hoping you were going to say no.
I know all about net. I've even been to see netball. Trust me, internationally and otherwise.
Yeah, my mum made
Hey,
me
Dawson,
play
I've even commentated on it.
There you go.
Oh,
There you go.
jeez. But, you know, we lose a lot of good athletic talent, you know, through other sports or various other, I guess, options that young females have. But you'll find, or we find anyway, sometimes, unless they were actually developed through football at an early age, we kind of lose them to the game anyway because of the way that the game is actually evolving. You know, you need more than being an athlete. You know, that's a great, you know, basic strength to have. But if you can't keep a ball in a tight space, you know, which is the way that the game's heading, you used to have so much more time and space on the ball, and now you don't. So if you can't keep the ball, it doesn't matter how strong and fast you are. So that's what we're finding. We're trying to develop our players at a younger age.
I did know this, that netball was bigger in Australia and New Zealand than, you know, women's football in those countries. And it's the one region of the world where players from Jamaica, England, South Africa and all over go to play their netball. Why, out of interest, can women's football, or why does it struggle to compete with that?
I'm not sure. It's just so big in Australia, and I believe they have a World Cup, and it's always out of us, the Kiwis and the English team, or the South African team. So, you know, when we have a World Cup, it potentially be out of a good 20 to 30 teams that, yeah, not 30 teams, sorry, 24 teams that can actually compete on the world stage, where I find that, you know, I believe they have 5. Look, if anyone's an avid netball fan, I'm going to get killed on here, but yeah, as I said, not a huge fan.
My daughter, my 14-year-old, came into the building here wearing a sweatshirt that said, "If netball was easy, they'd call it football." And she thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, this is probably for you, Caitlin, from Terry by email. Could you ask how many of the women in the US team have come through Charlie Cook's Curver coaching school? Do you know about that?
I am not familiar with that, but I know I can say that, you know, all of the players in the U.S. have come through the collegiate system. That's where they've really developed, and obviously with youth national teams, and they all well, most of them have played in domestic leagues here too. So I'm not familiar with that particular coach, but you know, I do know that the collegiate system is a big part of the training.
Sarah, I know that you've played in the Olympics. You've played
Yep.
for Australia. You've played in the Asian Cup, and you've also played in the World Cup. Which was the best of those big tournament experiences for you?
Oh, and in terms of the football, it would have been the World Cup. In terms of off the field, I guess distractions and entertainment, I believe the Olympics. It's you know, you're actually part of a bigger team, the Australian team, which is, you know, 400 athletes, and you know, when you finish competing, that you really get to hang out with them and get to know and understand different sports and athletes. And I think the spectacle of it all was pretty amazing. But if you're a traditional footballer, it's yeah, absolutely the World Cup. There's nothing like it. That's what you play for as a 5-year-old, what you dream of.
Previously, though, and I'm not talking about this year, but previously, was women's football taken more seriously in the Olympics than in the World Cup?
Well, do you know what? It's more so around the fan groups that are interested in the Olympics. So you might actually get people watching your games just because you're an Australian and just because they want to support you through the Olympics. Whereas we actually have a huge football following back home, which is mostly from the Socceroos, and obviously when there's a World Cup that comes around, that big entire group will actually follow the Matildas as well, just because they love football. So I think that the Olympics opens you up to new people who are not necessarily into football. I think that's probably the difference.
Same question to you, Caitlin. Do you feel that the Olympics historically has taken women's football perhaps more seriously than even the Women's World Cup?
No, I think I agree with Sarah that it targets different fans. You know, when there's an Olympics on, as an American, I'll watch the Americans do anything. They can be playing handball or ping pong, and suddenly I'm interested. So I think you're reaching a different audience. I think if you ask any of the players on the American team, they'll tell you that the World Cup is the more important tournament, and that's not a knock on the Olympics, but growing up in a football culture as a soccer player, the World Cup is always going to be the pinnacle of the sport.
Listen, you can all answer this question if you want to, but I'll throw it to Seth first because he's our representative covering the Champions League. Jack in Leicester wants to know, Seth, given the fact that Juventus can defend well and are an Italian team who do perform well when defending, and a top striker up front as well is arguably one of the greatest midfielders, and given the fact that they have made it to the final defeating some major big boys of European football, surely they have a better chance of winning than what everyone in Barcelona is making out.
Look, there is a chance. It's a one game, isn't there? So there's no reason. And I don't think it's going to be a walkover, as some of the people around these parts are predicting. But you've got to take into consideration the fact that Chiellini is out. He's somebody that will lead at the back. He's a voice. He's a good defender. And when you're facing the three who cause so many problems in so many different ways, you've got to be able to defend, and you've got to be really, really disciplined. And I don't believe there is any team in the world right now that could play Barcelona and expect to win 1-0. That cannot be your game plan. You've got to think that they're going to score a goal at some point. So the question for me, are Juve good enough to score two? Because they're going to need to score two to win it, in my opinion. And I'm not sure that they are going to be able to score 2 goals. And I'm also not sure that they're going to be able to keep Barcelona to just a single goal. So that's where I see the difference. But yeah, you know what? The Italian teams have been so good defensively in Europe. And again, they do have some good experience back there. And there is no reason why they won't go into the game feeling confident. But I think when you heard some of the press conference material over the course of the last couple of days, I think that tells you an awful lot about the stories of the two teams.
And I don't know if anybody else wants to comment. Sarah, do you keep an eye on the Champions League at all?
I do. Hopefully we can watch it tomorrow if our schedule permits, but Barcelona. That's it.
Yeah, you know which side your holidays are buttered, don't you? Yeah. Bert in Kent says to him, it's been great to see Suarez perform in the big pond that is Barcelona. I believe he'll be the difference tonight. Does Tim think that not being the centre of attention as he was when he was at Liverpool has helped?
Well, he wasn't the centre of attention when he first kind of made his name with the Uruguayan national team, because he was very, very happy to play second fiddle to Diego Forlan, who was the big star at the time, and the two of them had a terrific relationship. What he does, I think, Suarez, is he always gives Barcelona the possibility of lengthening the game, because he's so good on the shoulder of the last defender. His movement is so good. I think it's a kind of natural evolution. The Guardiola Barcelona, he would have picked 11 midfielders if he could. He'd have picked a midfielder to go in goal. And they played that possession until they created the 2 against 1 down the flanks, and then they played that man in. All right, so sides learnt to block that. So what's the new Barcelona? You've got the option of possession because they'll come back. The strikers will come back, but you've also got the option of lengthening the game, and it's Suarez who gives you that option. It's his movement who always gives you that option, and just his mere presence on the pitch and his ability to run beyond the last defender and stay on side opens up space for the others. So I think he's been absolutely crucial to this new Barcelona. But a word of warning about the Italians, about Juventus. A great former Barcelona player and coach, Johan Cruyff. And he always used to say, when he was a player, he said, these Italian teams, they can't beat you, but you can lose to them. And I think that's such a fantastic phrase. They can't beat you, but you can lose to them. They're not going to come out and meet you in an open toe-to-toe fight. They're not going to do that. But every mistake you make, they're going to look to capitalise on. They're going to look to score from set pieces, things like that. And if Barcelona had one of those days when the first goal just doesn't go in, who knows? So I think Barcelona are clear favourites. but don't discount the Italians.
Question from a listener, Caitlin. We've seen American football or US football bring over stars in their last days from other countries, but to beef up the American leagues. Is there a similar thing in play with women's football in the USA, bringing over stars from around the world to boost up the level of the game there?
Are you talking about the national team or in domestic?
No, in domestic club football.
I think there's an effort, but with the previous two American leagues, they both ended up folding. They weren't financially solvent. So they've taken a different approach this time around. The U.S. Soccer Federation actually is the organizer for this league, and in an agreement with the Canadian Federation and the Mexican Federation, they allocate national team players to play in the league. So they want this league to be a development league and, will help American players train and players from these federations. So right now, the league is called the National Women's Football League. There is a limit on international players. So, I mentioned earlier Lisa DeVanna played in the league. She was on the Washington Spirit. She used an international slot, and each team only gets 3. So I think they want those international players. A player like Nadine Anger, she was the FIFA Player of the Year last year. She plays for the Portland Thorns here in Oregon. But they do have to be careful about not overextending themselves, because you don't want a situation like with the previous league. Marta played in the WPS, and she drew a huge salary because she is the best player in the world, and teams really couldn't afford that. So, they do want to bring in international talent, but there are some limits in place to keep the league solvent.
Sarah Walsh, do you agree that the Brazilian Marta is the greatest women's footballer ever?
Look, if you have a look at what she's achieved, absolutely. Is she the greatest now? Probably not. No. And you know what? She'll probably eat my words throughout the tournament. She'll probably show us why she was. But I really think that she's got a lot of competition these days. I think that the gulf between her and the next best player is definitely not as big as it was, and I think we're going to see a huge amount of stars from this tournament.
Why was she so dominant? Why is it a natural gift that she has, or what?
Well, her touches on the ball and her technique, everything. I don't think she actually. If I really had to pinpoint a weakness, I couldn't think of anything. She was quick as anyone else on the park. She had an eye for goal. She could finish. She could beat players. And I think there's some Brazilians, actually, that when you watch them play, they do tricks for fun. And she used to do tricks to beat defenders. And when you get a player that really knows how to use their skill and really know how to damage teams, you could see the enjoyment she'd get on her face, through those challenges. And there was no one that could stop her. So... and she was consistent for so many years. So, I do believe she's the best player to have played.
Sarah, have you got time to stay with us for another half an hour? Do you need to go?
I actually have to get going because someone needs to use this phone. Sorry, I'm having such a ball too.
Yeah, I know, and all the questions are coming in. Okay, this one last question. Question.
Sorry, guys.
No, that's okay. This is from one of our listeners who says this is the first time that the BBC here is covering all the matches and live as well of the Women's World Cup, and clearly it will affect the success of the game over here. There's an estimated 1 billion viewers who will be watching the Women's World Cup. When you were playing for Australia internationally, could you imagine that there would be that sort of amount of people watching a World Cup, Women's World Cup, within just a few years of your retirement?
Oh, you're absolutely right. The game has just gone to another level in the last couple of years. And, Germany, I think, probably set the benchmark. And if you're just talking about broadcast, obviously that's going to go further, being in Canada and then lifting the bar again. But in terms of attendance, I think Germany, like I said, set the bar for that. So I'll be really interested to see what kind of numbers we get here. Our first game against the US is sold out. We have even, players' family members that can't actually come because they didn't get in quick enough, and it's pretty crazy to think. So it'd be just great to see how that actually unfolds. But as you mentioned, it's the game. The game is growing not only in terms of the level of interest off the field, the quality of football. It's when you look at Germany, I think the gap between them and the US is shortening, and that's why they're number one at the moment. If you look at a lot of the strengths that the US had over those years with speed and obviously they could play football. You need to be able to play football, but their speed and power and ability to be able to run teams out on the 90th minute, Germany is starting to get that as well. So they can also play football. Two powerhouses of women's football for me.
I forgot just one more. What do you do with 75 caps?
What do I do?
Yeah, where do you keep them?
You don't get a cap each game.
You don't get a cap each.
No.
No, you're serious. You don't get a cap each time you play for Australia.
No, you get your first cap, and then we call them caps after that. But if I had 75 caps, I'd probably give them away.
Okay, in the old days, they used to get caps for each game, didn't they? Sure,
no, you know how the cricketers wear a cap?
Yeah, I know.
They get their baggy green.
But I'm sure Bobby Charlton had like 100 caps or something.
Just on that, how's the cricket team going over there?
Yeah, the New Zealand team's doing really well against England. And the Ashes is still to come. Don't worry. The Ashes, we'll deal with that one when we get to it. No, it's been a real pleasure. Real pleasure having you with us, Sarah. Thank you very much. Sarah Walsh there, former Australia number 9, had a scoring rate of, guess what her scoring rate was, Tim? Have a guess.
Goal a game?
Whoa, not bad. Seth, have a guess.
0.8, I would say.
0.8. And Caitlin, do you know?
A goal every other game? I mean, she was a very good player.
You won it. You won the prize. Caitlin, you see...
Yeah, what do I get?
No, it's not that kind of a competition. You get the honour of knowing that you beat Tim Vickery and Seth Bennett with one swipe. That is
the greatest honour.
It is. I enjoyed that tremendously. So 0500 909 693. So we're in the business end of the World Football Phone in another 25 minutes or so to go. If you've got any questions on the Women's World Cup or the Champions League final or the Copa America as well, the people who can answer them are here with us. For this one is World Football Phone in. Caitlin Murray, a US football journalist in Oregon, is with us. The legend Dino Tim Vickery is also with us. He's in Santiago in Chile, and Seth Bennett, Five Live's very own, is in Barcelona rather than Berlin for the Champions League final. I don't get it, but I suspect it's got something to do with the tapas, has it, Seth?
Well, you know me, Dawson. Any time, any opportunity I get to go and see something a little bit different, and it is very different here in Barcelona, I'm going to be there. I'm going to offer a little bit of colour.
But the final's taking place in Berlin. How could you get that so wrong?
There'll be more people watching here than watching in Berlin. Trust me on that.
Well, they'll be louder. But I hear that you've discovered a messy dessert on your travels.
Oh, yeah. I went to a place today, Dawson. And you're going to laugh because it's going to relate back to food.
No, I'm not going to laugh because I've had a couple of eaten messes as well. Boom, boom.
Very good.
Together. Yeah, it was not bad, eh?
I went to the best restaurant in the world as voted last week, and it's a place called El Serra de Can Roca. And this place is run by 3 brothers who are massive Barcelona fans. And if you want to go there, Dawson, there's an 11-month waiting list. And when you go there, when you get there, it's going to cost you about £250 to eat per person.
Yeah. Well,
and I've got 11 months already sewn up. But they're huge football fans, and one day they decided that they were so inspired by Lionel Messi scoring a goal against Getafe that they wanted to make an experience for their diners, and the experience was the emotion of a Lionel Messi goal. And so they came up with a dish, a dessert dish, which actually, when it arrived at the table, it was inside a football case, of a ball. So it was a half ball cut in half with grass all the way around it. And it had the commentary of the goal played out as you ate it. And that was their messy
I just want to eat the food. Come on. Why'd you have to give me all these extras?
Well, it's incredible. I mean, their whole theory is about when you eat, it's about using all 5 senses. And that, of course, includes listening to this goal. And they felt it was particularly important because it was commentary in Catalan. And they felt that was a big part of it. And they said it was very, very successful. But them, they're just about to head out, the three brothers, to Argentina. They do a little tour every year where they go off to different countries and they shut down their restaurant. And they're going out to Argentina. So they think that they may have to do something special if the little man has a good day in Berlin.
Caitlin Murray, as a football journalist stateside, do you get to travel the entire length and breadth of the continent that you're in?
I've traveled quite a bit. Like I said earlier, I didn't think I'd ever go to Winnipeg to watch soccer, so that's going to be interesting. I wish, sometimes you wish that the United States was a little smaller. I think with the Women's World Cup being in Canada, I mean, we're talking 5,500 kilometers between Vancouver and Moncton. So, that's going to be something to manage.
Indeed, but you always go where the final is. I mean, you don't go to New York when the final's taking place in LA, do you? You don't do a Seth, do you?
Right, yeah. For the final in Vancouver, I'm not going to go fly to Moncton instead and see what the local flavor is like. I'm going to be in Vancouver for the final, for sure.
And do you just...
Hey, Dalton, can I just point something out here?
Go on.
I've been to Winnipeg. Now, if I had the chance to go to Winnipeg to go and watch anything, I would rather be in Moncton, I'd rather be in Vancouver, I'd rather be in Timbuktu, because Winnipeg is an absolutely mosquito-riddled, flat as a pancake, disgusting place.
Well, thank you for setting those expectations for myself.
Hey, take your bug spray, though.
Thank you very much, Seth.
Noted.
Brennan. Yeah. So where's Caitlin? Where can she get a decent beer or whatever she wants to do? I mean, Winnipeg is not just mosquitoes and people, is it?
Yes. Keep on driving.
I hope we don't have any listeners from Winnipeg.
Keep on driving, and eventually you're going to get to Calgary. And when you get there, there's lots of good places to go.
Yeah, tell them you heard it here first, Sarah. Tell them when you get to Winnipeg, you heard it here first. But on your journeys covering football, I'm sure do you cover football generally or just women's football in the States?
I cover both. I do it not totally full time. I am writing for The Guardian now for the Women's World Cup, but I've written for a number of outlets, and I have covered some men's soccer. I cover the Portland Timbers here in Oregon. They're a men's team.
And this is a real question from one of our listeners, this part anyway, that was building up to, which is the game that you've enjoyed the most in your coverage?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think in terms of the atmosphere and in terms of people being there about the soccer, I don't know if anyone on the panel has ever been to a soccer game in Portland, Oregon, but they call it Soccer City, USA. This is a place where people are really passionate about soccer. And we have a women's team here called the Portland Thorns, and they regularly get 14,000 plus crowds, which, is not necessarily a common thing for women's soccer clubs around the world.
That's brilliant.
So, yeah, the atmosphere for a Portland Thorns game is definitely a very unique thing. So every time I'm here in Portland covering one of the games, those are the most fun games I, have been to.
And Portland is... For those who don't know it, it's a bit of a hippie place, isn't it? Portland, Oregon. It's a bit of a hippie town.
Everyone's kind of just doing what they want to do, sort of thing.
Laid back, and middle class.
I have to be honest. I am a transplant to Portland, specifically because
I'm not blaming
soccer.
I'm not blaming you. I'm not accusing you of being middle class. The reason why I was building up to
I don't know a lot about... I'm still familiarizing myself with the city. All I really knew was that soccer was popular here, so that's where I moved to, basically.
I thought you were stating your working class roots, But the reason why I say that is because soccer, as you call it, is still viewed in America as very much a middle-class sport, which always amuses me. I suppose it's becoming like that in Britain as well, in England certainly. I suppose it's becoming like that, but it was traditionally a working-class experience, you know?
Yeah.
And in America it's just totally different.
I think part of that is probably there's a lot of, there's the club system here in America where, it's wealthy people that can afford to travel with these club teams. So I do think it does have the reputation of being, a sport that doesn't have a lot of diversity, and it's the more well-off people. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, look around the world, and that's definitely not kind of where soccer started. So
is there a certain snobbishness about soccer in the United States?
That's something that's been discussed. There was a New York Times article about basically snobby soccer fans, and I think it has a little bit of that reputation, but I think it's also becoming really mainstream. I think ESPN did a study, and soccer's going to be more popular than baseball soon. It's becoming a mainstream sport. It's, MLS, they have more games on TV now than they ever had. I think MLS games are being broadcast in England, in other countries. So it's becoming a normal sport here. People are following. The number of people who watch the World Cup continues to go up. And so I think that perception is changing, that it's only for snobby people or hipsters. I think it is becoming more of a mainstream sport. And
just to be clear, for Dave in Leeds, Vuvuzelas will not be making an appearance at this Women's World Cup, will they?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you know the Vuvuzela that...
the horns?
Yeah, from South African 2010 World Cup.
I hope not. I hate when you go to a game and it's just like that sound the whole time, or like you're watching a game on TV and it's just drowning. I don't think they do that, but I mean, I guess we'll see. That
was the greatest contribution Africa made to the World Cup, from my humble point of view, and you don't want it. Oh, God. We'll take it back then.
I apologize.
No, I'm only kidding. Janice wants to know, Tim, if who is going to be the overall top scorer in the Copa America tournament, and which team would that player be representing?
Well, it's a difficult one. I mean, last time around, 4 years ago, it was Paulo Guerrero of Peru. No one really saw that one coming. The Copa America does have a nice little bit of unpredictability in it, I suppose, because one of the things you're looking at is opponents. And the unknown commodity, I think, are Jamaica. Jamaica, first time in the competition, very physical, very strong side physically. But technically, will they struggle a little bit? And will opponents who play against Jamaica in the group phase have a chance to fill their boots? Difficult group as well for the Jamaicans. It's Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay. So, I mean, let's look around some of the candidates. Messi for Argentina has found his goal touch. Cavani of Uruguay, finally he gets a chance to lead the line. He's not second fiddle or even third fiddle behind Forlan and Suarez. Forlan's gone, Suarez suspended. So Cavani leading the line for Uruguay. Their group doesn't look too difficult, and he really has been banging in the goals. Start with Peru, which is quite a soft touch, I think, to start with, and also Venezuela in the group, who've had some defensive problems recently. So I think Neymar is a candidate. Chile would love Alexis Sanchez to really come to the party. The goals have dried up for them a little bit. Maybe they're saving them for the Copa America. So there's lots of candidates in there. I think if you're gonna pin me to the wall and say pick one, I'm going to go with Neymar.
And will Messi and Suarez be playing for Argentina and Uruguay respectively, and Neymar playing for Brazil straight after their Champions League final?
Well, yes, Messi, yes, Neymar, no Suarez. Suarez is still serving his suspension for the bite in the World Cup last year. So he misses the entire Copa America. He'll also miss some of the World Cup qualifiers as well. And Uruguay want to get as far as possible in this tournament because every game that they use up is one less game that Suarez is suspended for. But yes, the other players are going to have to rush back. And I know certainly the Argentina coach, he's nervous. He's got a few of his. He's got Messi, Mascherano, Tevez and Pereira as well of Juventus. So he's got 4 players. And he said today, the only thing I'm concerned about with the Champions League final is none of them gets injured. It does cut it a little bit fine, doesn't it?
And the tournament goes on for 2 weeks, does it?
No, a bit longer. It finishes on July the 4th.
But it's
basically 3 weeks in all.
It's basically the equivalent of our Euro Championships over here. But for these players who are going to go back to their European teams, they won't get a summer break at all, will they? How do their club managers feel about that?
Well, not very happy, especially as the European season starts earlier than usual, and the Premier League season starts very early this year, start of August, more or less. So Alexis Sanchez, no break at all, and it gets worse, because this time next year there is due to be another Copa America, the Centenary Copa America, which bizarrely enough, the centenary of South America's competition is being staged in the United States. So that's another year without holidays, although after the FIFA scandal, there's a possibility that Centenario Copa won't go ahead.
Seth, you set up a trend on Twitter and text and emails on desserts, footballing desserts. This is the best of the lot, I think, from Bert. He says he had a dessert in a cafe in Wimbledon High Road, and apparently there were 2 walnuts served in a vice. Anyway, yeah, it gets better, I can assure you. Caitlin, as far as the Women's World Cup is concerned as well, it's a question from one of our listeners. How are the other continents represented? So far, apparently, we've only talked about Europe and the Americas.
Africa, the African champion is Nigeria, and they were drawn into what is being called the group of death. So that's unfortunate for them, because you have to think that Nigeria had the best chance of really advancing far into this tournament, and in a group with the U.S., Sweden, and Australia, I'm not sure they're going to be able to get out of the group stage. And then looking at the Asian group, and I know Australia's in there, but Japan won the World Cup in 2011, and I think they're another favorite to go far. I'm actually surprised that a lot of people aren't really picking them to be in the final. I actually, in my predicted bracket, I did, and maybe I'm just crazy. But they're still a very good team. They have some of the best players. Homari Sawa, she came out of retirement to play in this World Cup. I think she won the Golden Boot last time around. So, seeing her come back will be really interesting.
Is there a player, Ben wants to know this, is there a player in the tournament who we don't really know much about, who you think might be a dark horse to emerge from the tournament and become an international star, maybe?
Yeah, I think, we're going to see a lot of teams enter the World Cup that have never been in a World Cup before. And I think looking at the Netherlands, this is a young team that is a dark horse. And they have an 18-year-old player named Anna Medema, and she scored the most goals in the European World Cup qualifying. She scored 16 goals, and I think she's a player that a lot of people are going to be looking to, because if the Dutch are going to do well, it's probably because she's going to do well. And, like I said, 18 years old, this is going to be the biggest event she's ever played in. So it's a question of, can someone that young and inexperienced rise to the occasion? She definitely has the talent, though.
Ben,
hey Dawson, I want to ask a question here. Yeah. What about Nigeria's Asisato Shwala? She was the BBC Women's Footballer of the Year. She is in that really tough group, but 20 years of age, could she still light up even against top quality opposition? Could she still light up the World Cup?
Caitlin?
Well, I think given the competition, so, Sweden, USA, Australia, I think these are really good teams that are going to be able to defend well against Nigeria. I mean, I think the problem with a team like Nigeria is they do have an amazing player like that, but do they have a complete team of great players? So is it going to be as simple as just, marking her and kind of neutralizing their attack? So I think that the group they're in does make it very difficult, but I mean, it's a World Cup. Anything can happen. World Cups are designed for upsets and amazing stories. So, I mean, it's definitely, if there's one group that I would urge people to watch, I know you have a lot of English listeners, but Group D is really going to be the one where things are going to be close. And I think we may see a team, if they get out of that group of death, I think they set themselves up well to maybe, win the whole thing.
And who do you think is going to get out of that group of death? Which two teams?
Well, so the way that this format works is obviously the top 2 teams of every group will get out, but also the top 4 third-place teams. So that does give teams more flexibility to get out of a group. But, in Group D, unfortunately, I have to say that I think Nigeria is going to be the team that goes home. I see Australia in third. And I hope no one accuses me of not being patriotic, but I think that Sweden might actually win the group and the U.S. will come in second.
And Tim, Ben wants to know a similar question to you. Which player that's relatively unknown do you think will make a name for themselves by having an impact on the Copa America and perhaps leading to a European move?
One I was just about to say, he is already in Europe, but I think he could go higher. It's a Colombian centre-back, Jason Murillo, plays for Granada in Spain. Now, this is an area of the team where Colombia have to renew, and this is one of the big things from the Copa America, renewing that defensive line. And the captain in the World Cup last year was Mario Yepes, who's coming up 40, so he's gone. And it's a new generation of centre-backs. And Jason Murillo of Granada, he looks quick and competent. He'll have a real test in the group phase because Colombia's second game is against Brazil. There's a bit of bad blood there. I think that these two sides just plain don't like each other very much. So it'll be interesting to see how he does, because I think he can certainly play at a higher level than Granada in the Spanish league.
And how's Big Phil's Chinese coming along?
I don't think he's really going to get to grips with that. That's Luis Felipe Scolari, who a year ago was going into the World Cup dreaming of leading Brazil to glory. Well, that didn't happen, did it? And he's just recently lost his job at club level with Grêmio. So he's now the latest big-name Brazilian to follow that Chinese money.
Yeah, indeed. Matt in Guangzhou wants us to mention that. He's in Shanghai at the moment. Greg says, a quick question for the legend, if you'd be so kind, why do most South American sides seem to treat the Copa America as a warm-up to the World Cup qualifiers?
Because that's what it is. This is after a year of only friendlies, lots of new coaches, lots of teams that aren't even half cooked. They don't have very much preparation behind them, so that the teams are going into it. It's the first time that these coaches can spend prolonged period of time with their players. So that's the tournament's position in the calendar these days. It kicks off a new cycle of competitive games. It's a great tournament in itself. But everyone, with the exception of host Chile, who have special pressure as being hosts, everyone else is primarily concerned with getting things ready for World Cup qualification, which starts in October.
Caitlin Murray, it's been a pleasure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully you can come back on the World Football Phone in another time. And certainly, if there are any interesting groups of death matches during the World Cup, please let us know about it and we'll speak to you some more. And all the best in the World Cup. Caitlin Murray, thank you very much. And Seth, what can I say? Hasta la vista, baby.
Ciao.
Eton Messi, that's the one.
On digital and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
bbc.co.uk/5live.